I'm Anthony Newbold. Welcome to Closer Look. My guest this week is the co-chair of the National Child Protection Council, Dr. Novia Lookie. Doctor, welcome to the show.
It is indeed a pleasure to be here, sir.
Why do we need a Child Protection Council?
The National Child Protection Council serves as the advisory council to the Department of Social Services and Urban Development. As such, we are the advisory board to the government on all matters related to child abuse in this country. And so we run the gamut from dealing with sexual abuse, physical abuse, educational neglect, and psychological abuse as well.
What is considered, and I know you said the various, what is considered child abuse?
Child abuse is the mistreatment of our children. And so our board is developed to ensure that we safeguard all children within our country.
What are some of the symptoms if I'm wherever I am, my home, my community, my church? What are some of the signs, some of the symptoms I should look for or I might see that says this child is being abused?
Sometimes we have symptoms that are really obvious. So you may encounter a child who outrightly says, I'm unhappy, I'm being abused, I'm being hurt. And then we have some symptoms that are not so obvious, and that would display itself in children who are depressed, children who seem a little bit withdrawn, children who are basically just crying out for help, and we realize that those kids, their needs need to be met.
A lot of times we think of child abuse and we think the physical again, and what we actually do to a child. Leaving children alone at home could be a form of child abuse, couldn't it?
Yes, sir, it could be.
Parents, and you know, we say child abuse because it's not something that's done in a vacuum. Obviously, the parents are primarily responsible. Talk about leaving children at home alone or a child at home alone. Parents say, listen, I have to go to work. I don't have anyone to keep her or him. What is the Department, Ministry of Social Services, what is there officially to support a parent in that
I don't really know if we have an official statement on it, but what we like to do is I want you to consider who we are as a country and who we are as a people. In many instances, parents have to, for whatever reason, leave their children home unsupervised. The wonderful thing about the history of our country is that we've always had that community base, whereas you may ask a neighbor, look into the children, or the children may know, if I need assistance, reach out to the neighbor. Obviously, the National Child Protection Council would not encourage 3- and 4-year-olds to be home alone, and so we like to use a blanket statement where we said children under the age of 12 should not be left home unattended for any extended periods of time. But for the most part, because of the community nature of our Family Island communities, our communities here in Nassau, yes, children are left home unattended as long as 8 hours, but for the most part, in many instances, a neighbor, a Grammy, somebody in that vicinity of that home looks after the children, and the children also know in the event you need assistance, reach out to this person.
I know, and you know, many years ago we grew up and we talk about, you're right, we have that kind of community where the village actually...
And we used to call those kids latchkey children, because remember, those kids were the kids that went to school with the little key around their necks, and they know when school gets out, use your key and get into the home.
Well, yeah, but where I wanted to go with that is, years ago, we didn't have no problem. We didn't think twice. Yeah, Auntie Sue down the road or Uncle Harry or cousin whomever, they can take care of them. People are more hesitant these days to entrust their children to a stranger.
And rightfully so, sir. With the dawn of the internet age, remember 20, 30 years ago, if somebody wanted to see pornography, basically the little books were hidden under the bed. You had to sneak to buy the books. Nowadays, our teenage population have active use of, or the ability to obtain pornography very easily. And so no longer do we have to be only concerned about a neighbor or a stranger hurting or harming our children. Mm-hmm. Now we need to also be concerned about persons who reside within the very same home as these children. And that presents a whole different dynamic in the protection of our children.
talk about internet, we're talking about electronics now. That brings up a whole different thing again. We're talking about bullying. And specifically, I'm thinking cyberbullying. Is that something that you find that you have to address as well?
Maybe about 4 years ago, the National Child Protection Council did a nationwide campaign where we focused on Stop and Think. And Stop and Think was designed to help children have a look at how you may contribute to cyberbullying or bullying in general. One of our major concerns when we talk about safeguarding our children must always be protecting them from violence. And that's all forms of violence, not only sexual violence, but of course physical violence. And so when we looked at cyberbullying, it took bullying to a whole new level. No longer was the bully who used rock and bottle or pushed and shoved, but the bully now comes into our very bedrooms, and that's even more frightening.
And I would say difficult to police and monitor.
But of course.
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily part of the narrative, but we talk about children and abuse. The 10, 11, 12-year-old, and I've seen statistics, who is impregnated by an older man. That's worse than bullying. That's worse. That's classic abuse. How come we don't see? Do you know? Why don't we see more prosecution of these kinds of things?
Prosecution has occurred in our country over the last 2 years involving persons who use the internet to commit crimes against children. It may not be widely publicized, but several persons have been brought before the court for using technology, not only for cyberbullying, but also using technology to exploit children. And so you've had persons who've pretended to be a certain age, exploit young girls by saying, well, meet me at the mall, you're my girlfriend, and when the young lady arrives on the scene, you meet an older man. And this man, in turn, then we take her to an alternative site to sexually assault her. So we've had a lot of cases over the last 2-3 years involving that type of behavior, and the government has prosecuted said persons.
I want to ask you about laws, but we're going to take this break, and we'll be back. We're talking with Dr. Novia Lookie, and she's the co-chair of the National Child Protection Council. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to A Closer Look. I'm Anthony Newbold speaking with Dr. Novia Lookie, and we're talking about child abuse, child protection. There's a whole range of child abuse areas that I'm not sure we fully explored. Tell me some more about those. I want to ask you something else, but tell me some of the other areas that we look at when we talk about child abuse.
Child abuse spreads a full gamut of different things that could constitute child abuse. And so when we look at child abuse, the big umbrella always is the mistreatment of children. And so when we consider child abuse, we look at abandonment, we look at neglect, we look at physical abuse, we look at physical neglect, we look at psychological abuse, which is one that persons don't consider, but psychological abuse. So we look at educational neglect, we look at drug abuse, and of course, we look at the physical abuse of a child.
And I know we want to make people, you have to hold people to account for whatever they do. You abuse a child, you need to be held accountable for that. But how far can that punishment go without affecting the child in a negative manner? For example, I'm a parent, I neglect my child. Are you going to send me to jail?
You know, it's interesting enough because the government signed the Convention for the Rights of the Child, and that document clearly states that parents, caregivers, persons must be very careful in regards to the type of discipline they administer to a child. If a child's skin is broken, that's an area of concern for us. And so we're going to continue our educational campaign to ensure that persons understand how to discipline with dignity, maintaining the respect of the child. And so that's a campaign that we're actively engaged in. We've been doing it for about 5-6 years now, and we intend to step up that campaign so parents understand how to discipline their kids effectively, but also maintaining the dignity and right of that child.
Because that's something else I was going to ask you. Who determines when the line is crossed from discipline to abuse.
It becomes abusive when a skin is broken. It becomes abusive when, as a parent, whilst I'm disciplining my child, I start making comments, you're nobody, you're nothing, you're worthless. Because now, even after the discipline ends, those words are still in the child's head, and it makes me feel worthless, as if my family doesn't care about me, I'm nothing, and the opportunities for me to be something great is diminished.
Yeah. In your mind, the child protection laws that we have, the legislation, is it strong enough?
I'm never
Probably
going to
need some
be.
work.
I'm never going to be happy with the laws once there's one single child out there that's being abused and we don't have the perpetrator. And so, what it's going to call for is, as a country, for us to step it up a little bit in terms of seeking to ensure that every child understands what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, and parents in the community understand their role in safeguarding all children.
Yeah. You, and this is something that, again, this is modern day living. Have you seen any evidence of sex trafficking with children? Have we seen any of that here in the Bahamas?
Well, I couldn't really speak a lot on that because that's with trafficking in persons. But we know that just based on our geographical location, there are going to be some minor cases involving children being trafficked through the Bahamas for use of sex. But to say that I've seen it on a large scale basis, that's a little outside of my preview, but we know that it is.
It happens.
Yes.
What is the average person, again, what do I do if I see a child being abused or I suspect that a child is being abused? What should me?
Say something, do something. One of the things about sexual abuse and abuse in general involving our children is a lot of persons have a tendency to feel as if it's not my child. And you'll notice that goes against the basic tenet of what our country was based on. Our country was always one where we took care of our neighbors' children. Everybody's child was our child. And so we've moved so far away from that where a person's attitude is almost as if this is my child, it's not happening to my child, so it doesn't affect me. But the abuse of children affects everyone. And let me give you an example. If, for example, you have a child who grows up in a violent home, exposed to a lot of physical abuse, exposed to domestic violence, exposed to sexual abuse, that child is an angry child. That child then goes into the school community and the same behaviors they see exhibit at home, they will then exhibit on your child. And so it's important that everyone gets the message. Say, if you see something, do something. Stop child abuse because eventually it knocks on all of our doors.
Of course, the other side of that is parents. Parents are a little different from they were 40, 50 years ago. This ain't none of your business. This my child. Don't touch my child. That's an attitude you must run into at some point.
You see it a lot, but the interesting thing is, like I said before, we are a community. Our country is built on the foundation of community, caring for each other's children. And until we get back to the point where we accept that all of the children belong to this one village, when we get back to that point, then we're going to realize that it's okay if someone sees your child misbehaving for that person to say to your child, behave yourself. Nowadays, when a parent says that regardless to hearing what the child was involved in, people just spring up and be ready to fight and carry on. And so we need to go back to some of those old principles that built our country if we want to truly safeguard our children.
We talk about safe spaces, for example, for children, for abused children. We had a situation recently that you may or may not wish to speak to at the emergency hostel. There's got to be some safe space somewhere where orphaned, unfortunately in some cases, unwanted children can go and really be safe.
Regardless of the incident that happened, and I can't really speak about it because it still is an active police investigation.
Yeah.
I want to say this: the Department of Social Services and Urban Development still maintains safe places for our children. Yes, we have isolated incidents that occurred. This is not the only incident. There are several isolated incidents, but I want you to know and for the public to know that social services still provides safe places for our children who are wards of the states. Let me give an example and one that you may be aware of. The incident happened maybe about 2 weeks ago where a young girl was on her way to school at Palmdale Primary and noticed that gentlemen who were not connected to this child saw something that they realized was not appropriate going on, and they stepped in. And so it proves to us that even though we complain about where our country is in terms of its social development and how people treat each other, notice that strangers got out of their vehicles and went to assist that child. And so that shows that we are still in the child protection business, regardless of the negative comments that we see. People still care about other people's children.
Yeah. The Royal Bahamas Police Force reported some, I think, 116 cases of child abuse last year in 2020. And as bad as that is, does that represent the full scope of what you see in the course of doing your work?
When we look at worldwide statistics, you'll get a better understanding of how big child abuse is. 1 in every 4 children are victims of child abuse. So we basically look at the numbers that are reported, and we think about it maybe by multiplying it 3 or 4 times for us to get a good picture of just how many children are abused in our country. I want you to take this factor into consideration. COVID-19 opened the door for us to realize how much our healthcare systems, how much our social services system, and even how much our education system needs improving. Basically, we need a renaissance in our country in order to safeguard our children. And so when you look at it, COVID-19, the lockdowns, the children not going to school, the children not having access to their guidance counselors, teachers, and nurses, the biggest casualty to me in COVID-19 must be our children.
Yeah.
And so just because of COVID-19 alone, more children were exposed to domestic violence. More children were exposed to child abuse. But it opens the door for us to also realize we have a whole lot more work to do, and we have more persons who are also committed to our children.
That's good. We got to take this final break, and we'll be back with a closer look at Dr. Novia Lookie after this. Welcome back to A Closer Look. Anthony Newbold speaking with Dr. Novia Lookie. A lot of us grew up under the maxim, children should be seen and not heard, all right? In other words, whatever you say don't matter, whatever you think don't matter. My position is, it must be extremely important for children to be seen as valuable human beings in their own right. And until that happens, we can have a problem.
In February 1991, the Bahamas government ratified a UN international law, and that law was the Convention for the Rights of the Child. That convention guarantees every child within the Commonwealth 54, I like to call them promises. One of those promises is the child has the right to be heard. And so just in that one statement alone, it means that our children have a right to be actively involved in every aspect of the development of our country. So children have a right to go in court and say how they feel about parents. Children have a right to be heard in terms of organizing themselves in community groups and being able to have a voice. And so one of the things that I like about the convention is we try to teach the children through the I Got It Right program that not only do you have certain rights that are promised by the government, but I want you to know you have a responsibility as well. So you have a right to live in a violence-free Bahamas, but you have a responsibility to make sure that you are not actively involved in violent behavior as well.
And you talk about that campaign. Are these campaigns that are in schools? Do the churches know about them? Where can somebody access these programs?
Well, over the last, let's say 15 years, the National Child Protection Council has done several campaigns throughout the country. And so we've exposed over 7,000 young persons, church organizations, youth organizations, just communities everywhere to some of our campaigns. So we have I Got It Right, we have Say No Then Go, we have even our Pinwheel program, which has been in several schools throughout the country, and we have, of course, Say No Then Go.
Okay, so there's some things that remind people of what you're trying to do. Crisis Center, you must work with them as well. Must be some connection between what you do and the Crisis Center?
Oh, most definitely. I've been at the Crisis Center for maybe about 20 years, and our program is also involved in sexual abuse, but what I love about it is we have here in the Bahamas what we call a wraparound program, and that program involves the Department of Social Services. It includes the Sexual Offenses Unit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. It includes the Suspected Child Abuse and Neglect Unit for the Ministry of Health, and then, of course, the Bahamas Crisis Center. And so what we do is, as long as a child is reported to any of those agencies, we follow that child through in regards to making sure that the police have the evidence, making sure that social services knows what help the family may need, as well as Ministry of Health, dealing with the medical aspect of it, and it ends, of course, with the Crisis Center assisting with prosecution as well as administering psychological first aid.
Whatever we do, information, education is critical.
Yes.
What's your association? Do you have one with the University of the Bahamas?
Well, presently, yes. Of course, I'm an adjunct professor at the University of the Bahamas, and we always push through our through the psychological department as well, ensuring that our children coming up are aware of what is healthy development, what needs to be done to ensure that it gets out in the communities. Basically, we're trying to get everyone to be social agents of change in our community, and that's the basic thrust.
And I asked about UB because those young people, but they're just above being a child. I mean, they're just getting out of being a child. And if there's anybody who can understand and push your message, it must be somebody of that age group. Tell me some of the other projects that you're working on down there with the Child Protection Council.
Well, also the Youth Empowerment Program has always been an avenue of change, a vehicle of change as well. And so we do a lot of training with the Youth Empowerment Program, conduct a lot of workshops and that kind of stuff, because like you said, in order for us to get our messages out, one of the key ingredients is youth-led organizations. It's important for their peers to be able to say, all right, you suspect that you're a victim of child abuse, something is going on. Let us make sure that the young people have the tools available to give it to their peers as well.
Family islands. We have this kind of discussion, and most people presume we're talking about New Providence. What about Grand Bahama and Abaco and Eleuthera and all the other islands?
Over the last maybe 8 years, the National Child Protection Council has gone into all of those family island communities. We've been to Grand Bahama, we've been to Bimini, we've done Abaco, Eleuthera, Long Island, Cat Island, and Inagua. And so we've gone into those family island communities, spreading the word, giving our messages. Our coloring books are out there. Today we could even launch our digital coloring book, Say No Then Go. And so our reach is getting a whole lot bigger, but we are planning right now our pop-up festival. That festival is scheduled to be held April 23rd. It's gonna push our message. We're gonna push child abuse prevention, but more so than anything else, we're gonna push I Got It Right. And so we are gonna be on a virtual platform just geared towards getting our message out and helping parents and community understand their role in safeguarding our children.
And that pop-up festival, again, only online, it's not?
Virtual, it's a virtual pop-up festival. We're looking to have 25,000 kids and parents on.
Yeah, again, we talk about being able to reach children where they are. We talk about the technology, and that's your use of technology.
Yes, sir.
To kind of blunt the other side, which is what you're trying to run away from.
Yes.
Unsupervised children being preyed upon. For you now, the society, and I know we say we are society that generally cares for each other. Have you gotten the kind of response you expected to the programs that you've proffered, both here in New Providence and the other family islands as well? What kind of response have you
I guess the
gotten?
biggest thing, so that we could always look at is the seashell story. that we may not be able to save everyone, but if we save one more child, we change the trajectory for an entire family. And so for us, in terms of getting our message out, no, every day we don't have a happy story, but when we have a happy story where we're able to help a family, we're able to turn a family around, or we even able to help a child dream on another level, that's success. And so we have been getting the message out, and we've seen organizations, community organizations, Stevie Dean and Rotary came in and said, you know what, we need to jump on this. We need to see how we could assist. And so the message is mushrooming out through community stakeholders. So once again, the village working.
The village is working.
The village is working.
And there's hope for those suffering from child abuse.
Hope and healing is available.
Thank you. And thank you for watching A Closer Look. Remember, you can also see us on Facebook and on YouTube.